us go live now. And we are indeed live. So I'll bring it back. Great. Let me just cut this off so that I'm not hearing it myself. Great. So welcome to the 2020 Technocratic Student Senate Forums. We were having a bit of a technical difficulty, so instead of streaming this on Facebook Live, we are streaming it on YouTube. So we are here with the candidates for treasurer, parliamentarian, and secretary. Of course, these elections do not have voting for the general public. Instead, you are going to be relying on your student senators to vote. But just to get started, we first have Connor Heath, who is running for treasurer. Then we have Steve Carmi and Lauren Browning, who is running for parliamentarian. And then we will end it with Jenna Giordano, who is running for secretary. So to start with you, Connor, while you are running unopposed, why do you feel you are qualified to be treasurer?
Thank you. I feel like I'm qualified to run for treasurer because throughout the year that I spent in Senate, I went to pretty much every budget management committee meeting and learned the ins and outs of that, and have prior experience in club leadership as president and fundraising chairs of different clubs back in high school, and I'm very experienced with time management as well as budgeting and managing a lot of people to get things done. So I feel like that makes me qualified to be treasurer.
Now, President-elect Curtis Gray discussed in his forum that he wanted to improve diversity and inclusion in Student Senate. What do you think that the executive board and Senate as a whole can do to be more inclusive to all students?
I think as a whole, Senate should work on senator inclusion in clubs and senator participation in different clubs by different category. Like we have an affinity chair and a club chair for diversity. Maybe senators should have a requirement to go to multiple different club events, one having to be in the diversity affinity group level and etc. and on there, as well as just getting the word out and presenting a open and comfortable atmosphere at all levels of Senate so that everybody feels that they have a voice and a welcoming hand into the area.
Now, how would you assess Giacomo Coppola's tenure as treasurer? What about it would you seek to emulate, and what would you seek to change?
I think Giacomo did a very good job at extending an open hand and welcoming atmosphere in the budget management committee. I felt like clubs felt like they were very welcomed and encouraged to submit multiple budget proposals to get money for their events, as well as just come and talk to BMC to see how they could improve advertisement or what have it with their different events. And I would like to continue that air of welcoming and friendliness in the BMC. But something I think I would like to improve upon is the disclosure and the discussion of what BMC does during its committee meetings with the rest of Senate, because I feel like if I start say a message that sends out to the Senate alias of what BMC approved for budgeting that week, they would know all the different events that are going on soon that Senate's budgeted for, and they'd have a better idea of what they have to do for opportunities on campus.
Great. Now, you, as treasurer, you would also serve as the chair of Budget Management Committee. How many BMC meetings have you attended, and how would you assess that committee's internal workings?
I've attended all but two, I'd say 2 or 3 this year for Budget Management Committee because of scheduling conflicts. And I'd say that the internal workings of Budget Management Committee was very smooth and very open. All the members were very congenial about allotting or not allotting money with the clubs and gave very good advice to the club representatives that were asking for money. So I thought it went very well this year.
Great. And you currently sit on the BMC as a committee member. As you know, over the past couple of years, Student Senate has worked to increase access to the student body, specifically in the Budget Management Committee. How would you evaluate that effort, both for BMC and Student Senate as a whole?
I would probably try to extend it a little more. I feel like it was probably more focused towards the club representatives or the club treasurers that came to the budget management committee more than the general population. I feel like more senators should probably sit in on the budget management committee to get a better idea of what it's like and to see what they're voting on when we have large budget proposals during Senate meetings. So I'd like to improve participation actually.
Cool. And now one final question for you, and this comes from an audience member. So last week we also saw this question in the presidential and vice presidential candidate forums. We recently had an amendment that made it so it is more difficult for clubs to get funding specifically for t-shirts, which end up being uniforms for some clubs. Do you support the funding of uniforms? And could we be seeing an amendment that would roll back the policies against funding for t-shirts and uniforms?
I was a part of the budget management committee's thoughts and discussion on this for the amendment to the uniforms. And we determined at the time that we felt that the t-shirts that were being given out to clubs that use them as uniforms but didn't stay within the club was more like just handing out free t-shirts, which I remember at the VP forum and presidential forum that someone claimed that was a little hypocritical. So I feel like we could evaluate it again and see what we can do to like change the viewpoint on it or adjust the viewpoint so it's fair to everyone and so that the BMC and Senate still feels like they're using their money wisely and it's just not going to like fit someone's wardrobe.
Yeah, that sounds great. Connor, I'll provide you now with some time if you want to make some closing remarks.
Um, I guess I am just excited. I know I'm running unopposed, but I'm excited to be treasurer for next year and to help improve and run Senate as smoothly and openly as possible. And I'm excited to work with the rest of the exec board, Curtis and Katie, and well, right now, I guess Jenna.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Connor. So now we'll move on to parliamentarians. So for that, we have Lauren Browning, class of 22, and Zeev Carmen, class of 23. So just to start, and I have some questions that will be for both of you and then some that we'll ask you individually. So just for both of you, we'll start with Lauren. Why do you think you are the most qualified candidate to be parliamentarian?
Well, I am the president of two different clubs right now, and I maintain the constitution for both of them. And so I've been amending it as necessary and working with them. And actually in Multi United Nations, which is one of the clubs that I'm the president of this year, we dissolved one of the positions in exec. And so we'll be facing that same sort of situation next year because we're getting rid of the club's liaison and Senate. So that position is written really heavily into the Constitution. There's a whole article to just that position, and we have to figure out how to reallocate and resituate the position into what exists after it's dissolved. So I think that I've had experience with that. I've had experience in leadership, and I think that helps me when it comes to parliamentarian.
Great. Zeev, same question to you.
I haven't had much experience actually writing legislation. However, what I lack in experience, I more than make up for with my dedication and enthusiasm. Through my studies and hobbies, I have dedicated probably about anywhere from 12 to 20 hours reading and understanding texts of laws and resolutions, such as the law that governs the place in my virtual background, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. Building on that point, I have been a member of the Docents Guild at the Reagan Library for the last 2.5 years, and I'm very familiar with their constitution, as well as our current Senate constitution. So I know how these guiding documents work, and I also know in my 2 years at the Reagan and my year in Senate, I've seen what works in terms of amendments and what works what doesn't work in terms of amendments.
Great, thank you, Zeev. Back to you, Lauren. As parliamentarian, you would be facilitating conversation about constitutional amendments. How would you evaluate parliamentarian Shane Carley's performance in presenting amendments and facilitating fruitful discussion revolving around the Constitution?
I think Shane did a really good job. He's obviously very present in the Senate, but I think we could sort of up the amount of times that we see policy come to the floor. I think it's one of the most underrepresented positions on the executive board. And so I'd like to hear from them a little bit more, whether it's through an actual revision or addition, or whether it's just, here's what we're thinking about, can we have more input? I don't really hear that much from parliamentarian and from the policy committee. And so I think we just need to hear a little bit more from them.
Great. Same question to you, Zeev.
Shane's done a wonderful job in terms of actually presenting the legislation. However, the controversy surrounding the recent clubs amendment last November, December, it proves that before you even bring an amendment to committee, you need to make sure you get Senate's input and Senate's approval on whether or not they think it's a good idea. But simply because amendments really are, I mean, they affect Senate, and therefore Senate should tell you before we spend time is valuable, we only have so much of it, and if we are spending our time on amendments, we need to spend our time making amendments that will benefit Senate. So I think that's the one place that the position of parliamentarian can see growth next year. And as parliamentarian, I intend to put out feelers and conduct informal surveys at Senate meetings during the policy committee's time to present, just to make sure that before I even bring it to committee, that Senate's okay with it, and Senate as in general thinks it's a great idea.
Great. Now, Lauren, both of you, and I'll ask Zeev this as well, both of you make mention in your statements of purpose of amending the Constitution to be both less vague and more accessible. What would that entail?
Well, I think one of our biggest examples right now is that there is no qualification for who gets to vote for the rising class of senators. For example, the seniors didn't get to vote this year. And that is something that I thought was a little strange, because I seem to recall they were able to vote last year, but I don't remember exactly. But I do think it's interesting that there was no mention of it in the Constitution. And I think that that's just one example, and one relevant example right now. I know we're in unprecedented times, and so it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on with the same amount of input. But I think that if the Constitution should stand in these times, you can turn to the Constitution and you'll have the answers. And so I'd like to make sure that there are no loopholes, there are no questions being asked. When you read a document, you should know what it's for.
Zeev, same question to you.
As they were saying in the presidential and vice presidential forums, I believe it was Curtis who brought it up, that the current exec board was taking a lot of things from precedent rather than what's actually in the Constitution. And like America, I think that the Senate Constitution should be our supreme law, and what's in the Constitution should be what happens. So like Lauren said, obviously the example of elections is a big one, but I think that there are a lot of smaller loopholes that could be fixed. For example, the entirety of that clubs amendment saying that clubs don't have to go to Senate, that's already in there. Clubs can petition to get out and not have to show up to Senate meetings, but no one knew about it. And look at how much controversy an amendment for something that was already in the Constitution caused. So I think that's one of my big ways of solving the vagueness in the Constitution. Another issue within the complexities of the Constitution, it's a long document. And I highly doubt that students who aren't in Senate have read and understood the full thing. In fact, I've spoken to many of my friends, and they've had some serious misconceptions about Senate. I mean, an extreme example would be one of my friends thought she couldn't come to Senate because she wasn't a voting member. So I think that I call it Senate Spark Notes. I think that as parliamentarian, we need to just take certain topics, condense them, and simplify them so it's easy to digest. You're able to easily find the topic you're looking for. And that'll also go back to increasing inclusivity. If more people understand how we work, more people are going to participate. More people will feel comfortable participating. More people will come to meetings.
Great. Last question that would be for both of you, and then we'll move on to separate questioning. While also sitting on the executive board, the parliamentarian does also sit as chair of the policy committee. How many policy meetings have you attended, and what would you do to improve how that committee operates? Lauren?
I have not been to any policy meetings. I sat on the opinions board last year, but being in a committee that still forms legislation and presents it to the Senate, I feel comfortable taking up the position of leading the policy committee because I do know how to formulate legislation not only through opinions, but also, as I said, I'm an active participant in the Model United Nations club, and I have been. And so I know how to write policy, and I feel like I could accurately do it and portray what the Senate and what the club members and everyone would be wanting to be seen. Obviously, then I would not know exactly what goes on in the committee, but I did hear from Shane as he was reporting that there wasn't always high attendance. And so that would be something that I'd be looking towards. He has occasionally said, it was just me and one other guy, or it's just me tonight. And so I want to make sure that that's not happening. It's a very important committee and thus should have an audience.
Great. Steve?
Unfortunately, I had scheduling conflicts pretty much every time policy committee was meeting, so I really didn't actually have the chance to come to any like Lauren. However, I have had experience sitting in on the policy committee at the Reagan Library as we recently changed our policies and procedures. So I think between that and my experience as leadership, I was leader of the academic decathlon team in my high school, and I was the team captain of our county championship quiz bowl team 3 years in a row. So I do have leadership experience. Like Lauren said, we do need to increase participation, but I think between my academic experience and my experience at the Reagan Library, I could very well lead and increase participation in policy committee.
Great. Zeev, sticking with you for a second, just a one-on-one question. This past semester, you were very vocal about your experience as a RISE member in the campus dorms. Considering the emphasis on the apparent divide between Greek and non-Greek students that we saw discussed in the presidential and vice presidential forum, do you think that Senate is sufficiently representative of students with interests in non-partying social activities?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? My internet cut out for a second.
No problem. Yeah, this is a whole new ballgame for all of us. So this past semester, you were very vocal about your experience as a RISE member in the on-campus dorms. Concerning the emphasis on the apparent divide between Greek and non-Greek students that we saw discussed in the presidential and vice presidential forum, do you think that Senate is sufficiently representative of students with interests in non-partying social activities?
You know what? I think that while we might not be representative, from everything I heard, and I know sitting on CLAC, that's been one of our big initiatives. I don't know if we are, but we're definitely moving that way. And as a member on exec board, I think I could definitely help continue move it this way. I know our current president-elect, our current vice president-elect, both of them are members of Greek Life. I'm unsure about whether or not Connor and Jenna plan to rush, but I do think that it would be important for exec to have someone who isn't involved in Greek life, and I most definitely will not be involved in Greek life.
Now, Lauren, I'll also pivot that to you since you are class of 22, and from what I understand, you are also not a member of Greek Life. So what are your thoughts on that as well?
I think that there is a divide on campus between who decides to rush and who doesn't, simply because I think once you're in a house with a group of people, you end up just being with those people a lot more. So I think that you end up just in different social groups. And so I think there needs to be some sort of bridge, like Zeev was saying, between the people that are in Greeks and the people that aren't. And I don't think there should be any animosity towards that. And I also don't think that having a certain amount of people not be in it or be in it should be that important on the exec board, because we should be representing the student body as a whole anyways, so we should be representing everyone. Obviously, we'll hear all the perspectives in Senate, and we should be able to listen to everybody through Senate. And so I think that there needs to just be a little bit more understanding between the groups, that there are different circles that people would choose to be involved in, but there shouldn't be any animosity between the two different groups, which there tends to be, which is unfortunate.
Great. And I'll stick with you for a second, Lauren. You did speak about this earlier, but in your submitted materials, you did mention your experience with maintaining and amending the constitutions for the clubs that you are president of, Ski Club and Model UN. And you stated that this has provided you with experience in writing out a position in the Constitution, and that has prepared you to do the same with the recently removed club's liaison position. You also wrote, and I quote, "The position is also indicated in the club recognition process section, which has been somewhat shaky this year. I would like to bring some stability to the process and create a procedure that works without constant amendment." Now, I know that you currently sit on the Senate as an affinity group leader, representing clubs. Can you expand on the issues you see with the current process and how you would like to amend that?
Well, there were so many changes to it this year, so I feel bad for any club that was trying to just figure out what was going and how to be recognized and exactly the right way to do it at any given time. I think it's hard to amend the same thing several times in a year, and so it would be great if we could just get one baseline idea and keep it that way. And it's going to be shaky going into this year too, because we had something that worked, but then we dissolved a position. So we're going to have to figure out a new way to get that to be stable for anybody who's trying to be recognized. They shouldn't be searching around for an answer. And that answer will be written in the Constitution and won't be hard to find. And so I want to make sure that everyone knows that there is a Constitution with those answers, first of all, and then second of all, that those answers aren't going to change on them at any given point.
Great. And last question to you, Zeev, and then I'll allow you guys to make your final statements. So you outlined something of a laundry list of amendments you wish to pursue. I quote from your statement of purpose: "Among the amendments I plan to implement will be one, mandating senators to attend events throughout the year; one, extending the accountability and outreach of the Senate Executive Board by requiring members to attend at least one event from each affinity group so they can truly connect across the entirety of the wonderfully diverse spectrum of clubs on campus; one, adding a voting position representing international students to further increase the representation within Senate; and one, expanding Article 4, Section 3, Part 2 of the Senate Constitution, which allows juniors studying abroad to serve half terms, to allow seniors who plan on graduating midway through the year serve as senator for their fall term, making Senate more inclusive for those who wish to participate. I also plan on clarifying and simplifying the language of the current Senate Constitution, making it more accessible and further increasing the transparency and efficiency of and participation in Senate proceedings." Now, that's obviously a lot of goals for the next year. Which of these would you start with and why?
As I mentioned earlier, I definitely want to make the Constitution just clearer and simpler. I think that would be a process going throughout the year, but of course that takes priority because we can't make any big sweeping changes unless we have a solid foundation. That being said, I know last semester, it was a huge deal about senators not reaching out and not attending Senate-funded events. So I was speaking with a senator the other day, and I came up with the idea we need to somehow mandate senators to come to events. However, how do we mandate them so that they go to a variety of events? If we just say every senator has to go to 3 club events, for example, all 3 of those club events could be in a club that they're already in per se. So I would propose a sort of Gettysburg curriculum requirements for senators for clubs so they can get the breadth of clubs and see exactly what our clubs have to do. I think that would be a priority. My other large priority would be reforming the elections. As Lauren said, there is the issue about seniors, whether or not seniors can participate in elections. Right now, I personally have no stance on whether or not they should be allowed to. However, like I said earlier, I would get the opinion of Senate and make sure to do whatever Senate thinks is best. As well, I mentioned Article 4, Section 3, Part 2, which that's, for those of you who aren't as familiar with the Constitution, that's the one that gives juniors the right to serve half terms. However, I think that's unfair to seniors and sophomores who are studying abroad. I know a couple of people who really, really wanted to run for Senate and run as voting members in my class, but they're going abroad in the fall. they're not able to. I don't think that's fair. I think that completely goes against everything Senate stands for with our inclusivity. So I think those would probably be my two biggest priorities.
Great. And now I'll allow, similar to what we did with Connor, Lauren, if you want to make your closing statement.
So I'll start out by just reiterating that I think I'm very qualified to go into this position. I've sat on 2 different revision committees for Constitution. I hold 2 different constitutions right now, and I'm very familiar with policy writing, as Model UN is a really big part of my life, and so is Opinions Committee this past semester. And so I think with that, that makes me qualified to be parliamentarian. And I also understand that we can only do so much in a year. And so I'm going to set out these core values that I think we need to get done. And obviously Senate will have their input too on what they value and what needs to come in, but we can only get so much done in a year. And so I'm not going to come in and be overzealous with that. I do agree with what Z was saying about participation with senators. I don't really see that much from senators. I want to make sure that there is a difference between senators and say affinity group leaders. We're both representing different things, different people, but I think we should see a little bit more from senators as they are this elected position versus just a nominated position in-house. So I think we should see more activity outside of Senate from Senate so that we know that we're seen and people know what we do. Like I said, when I was in the vice president candidacy, that I think it's very important that Senate reaches out to people that we have not had a lot of contact with, and that we use the clubs, which we have all the club members for. I just want to make sure that we can get back to where our roots are and that everybody knows that Senate works for you.
Great. Zeev, same thing.
The Senate Exec Board is the face of Senate. As you guys all know, I'm friendly, I'm personable. I think I would make a good face of Senate. I would further that by saying I think I would make a good parliamentarian purely because of my dedication to the position. You guys all know exactly how vocal and opinionated I can be. You guys all know how much I want to make a difference. So I'm asking you, Senate, one more time for your faith, to place your faith in me, and I promise you I will do great work and I will help Senate work for everyone. Thank you.
Great. Now we'll move, of course, on to Jenna and talk about secretary. So Jenna, similarly to Connor, you are running unopposed, but why do you feel that you are the most qualified to be secretary?
Yeah, so as we saw with Sid's past sitting as secretary, the secretary really needs to be a very organized person who is, willing to really put in that time. We've all read Sid's minutes. If they're very, very detailed, it really takes someone that really is going to put the dedication into the job. And I am someone who I feel will be able to put that time in and really dedicate what needs to be dedicated to the position in order to make sure Senate runs smoothly, because without the secretary, the Senate would not be able to function the way it does.
Great. Now you spoke a little bit about that already, but how would you assess Sid Kwan's tenure as secretary? What about it would you wish to emulate, and what would you seek to change?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I really do feel like Sid did a great job. So similarly, I would like to make sure that I would communicate with the Senate and the student body the same way Sid did, making sure that what I'm sending out is detailed and informative. But I want to make sure that as secretary, I get a little more involvement with students outside of just the Senate community and try to encourage, non-senators, non-affinity group leaders, and non-club representatives to come to Senate and voice their opinions. I do feel like the secretary is like a very outreaching position. And so I think in that role, I might be able to get more involvement from the entire campus.
Yeah, and now you also touched on this as well, but while secretary does not necessarily have to sit as chair of the outreach committee, the secretary does have many responsibilities relating to public relations. How would you approach expanding the student body's access to Student Senate?
So I do plan on rushing into a Greek organization in the fall. So if that does work out, I would definitely encourage the members of wherever I end up to come and voice their opinions. I served on Opinions Committee last year, I guess. And I would definitely consider doing that again this year. I really enjoyed it. So there again, encourage people. I am a very personable person. I like to talk to a lot of people, and I just think I would be able to, go around and just encourage my friends and to encourage their friends and kind of spread the idea that Senate really is there to represent the student body, and that it's important for people with student concerns or just people that are interested in what's going on campus. And I would encourage them to come and voice their opinions at Senate, because Senate needs to hear the voices of everybody, not just the people that are required to attend.
Yeah, and Jenna, just because, we also heard a lot of conversation about that in the presidential and vice presidential forums, what do you think Senate, actively needs to do to increase diversity and inclusion within Senate? We hear a lot about that it's the same people that are in the meeting, same people that are showing up or wanting to participate in ways like being on the executive board or being on student Senate. So how does Senate, really find a way to include those voices that are not being heard?
I definitely think that is a very pressing problem that we have on Senate, as well as it is a very difficult one to solve. I think our best option right now is just to try to, encourage a very inclusive feeling at Senate meetings. When we were discussing the amendment, I know there was a lot of discussion of how students don't feel like Senate is an inclusive space. And I think it's something that, as secretary, as someone who's reaching out to a lot of people, I feel like I'll have the ability to encourage everyone to be open-minded and inclusive, as well as just hoping that the entire executive board, really works together to create a not hostile environment where everyone really does feel comfortable to voice their opinions. And I think the best way to do that is looking at the different types of people that are going to be not only on the executive board that are running for Senate, and people are involved in different things. So, asking everyone on Senate to encourage openness and a greater participation, I think, is just the best way to go about that right now, and see how that works, then take it from there.
Great. And similar to how we did with the last three, I'll give you some time now to provide some closing remarks.
So similarly, I know that I am running unopposed, so I'm excited to work on the executive board of Senate next year. I do think that I will be able to, continue to reach out to Senate and student body and maintain a very open environment. I hope that I am able to really keep everyone engaged and involved, and just continue what the executive board of last year did, and build upon it and continue to make sure that Senate works for the student body.
Great. And that will, end the Technocratic Student Senate forums. Of course, we'll see senators voting for these and get results soon. So thank you all for participating, and thank you whoever has been watching this. Best of luck to all the candidates, as well for those who are running for student senator positions and class officers. Of course, as always, stay well, stay at home, stay social distancing. As Ben always likes to say, stay doing whatever the hell they're telling you to be doing, and we will all see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I can count on your vote.